I've been sitting on this story for quite a long time, and I've debated with myself over finally committing to sharing it and typing it all out. It's one of those things that happens to you, and you just kind of sit there thinking, this can't be real. This kind of thing doesn't happen to people like me. It's almost like a surreal dream. You know, if you never talk to anyone about it, then you never have to admit that it truly did happen to you. But this did happen, and it was one of the scariest experiences of my life. Anyway, that's enough rambling. I'll start off with some backstory to explain the situation I was in at the time, and the new mindset I was trying to develop. I'd always been a fairly heavy-set person, even since I was a small child. Cut to me at 25 years old, all of 5'7" and quite heavy-set at 250 pounds. Needless to say, not the healthiest person in the entire universe. One night in December of 2019, I had a pretty severe health scare that sent me to the emergency room. When I returned home that night, I made a vow to myself I would grow more healthy, confident, and start making big changes to my life to become the person I always wanted to be. No more self-deprecating, no fatty meals of fast food with no exercise after. And to the surprise of myself and basically everybody else in my life, I suppose, I actually managed to commit. I changed my diet completely to a mixture of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, with a fairly sturdy meal at the end of the day. I also made sure to start walking 3 miles every day around my suburban neighborhood to get some much-needed exercise. The area I live in, though, can easily reach 100+ degrees during the daytime, so after a bit of exploring what might be the best time to get my exercise in, tried both morning and extremely late nights, I decided the perfect time to go would be around 9:30 at night. You know, cool but not too cool, and there wouldn't be many people around either. I could get a lot of thinking and daydreaming out of the way at the same time. In hindsight, this was probably an extremely stupid move, but in addition to leaving at the same time every single night, I would also take the same route every time as well. I would walk through the suburbs, cross the busy intersection, and head off into the more rural areas until I reached a midway point that I'd measured out to be exactly 1.5 miles. Then I'd turn around and walk right back. I'd been doing this for a fairly long period of time before anything bad ever happened to me. At least a year or more, I believe. I'd made some serious progress with my weight loss too, dropping all the way down to just 200 pounds. I'd never experienced anything remotely strange or creepy either. Honestly, in the entire time, I'd encountered maybe a grand total of 3 people, and those had all been people standing outside their houses, taking out the trash for a moment and things like that, just waving idly. As you can imagine, it came as quite the surprise to me when right around the start of COVID, I actually ran into another person while out on my walk. I remember our first meeting almost like it happened to me yesterday. I was enjoying my exercise, headphones in, and tuned into a podcast like usual, when suddenly I felt a strange tingling by my side. One of those feelings that you're being watched, you know? Or like when you feel a bug might be crawling over your skin. Suddenly, I felt a tap on my left shoulder and let out a quite embarrassing-sounding, startled shriek. When I turned to my left, I saw a man who had somehow slipped up next to me, standing there and giving me a friendly smile. I had no idea how he'd even snuck up on me like that without me even feeling his presence or hearing him. I usually play my stuff at a low volume, and it tends to cut out frequently because of the crappy internet in the area as well. At first glance, the man seemed Hispanic, around the same age as me, and appeared to be out for a night jog as well. He was dressed in sportswear and had a water bottle clipped to his hip. "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. I was calling out to tell you I was passing by, but you didn't answer. You're not exactly giving me much room here." He chuckled and pointed out the fact that in my distraction, I'd apparently wandered exactly into the middle of the narrow sidewalk and forced him to either jog through the bushes or out into the street. I took a deep breath and blushed in embarrassment at being so startled. It was honestly a relief that that was all this was about. Actually, he was fairly friendly and didn't give off any weird vibes, so although weary, my anxiety calmed down a lot. The guy looked just like any other guy you'd see working at the grocery store or driving to the bank or whatever too, so I didn't feel all too threatened. I apologized for taking up so much space, moved to the right, and he continued jogging along his way. That was the end of our first encounter, just a brief friendly chat, something I immediately put out of my mind and continued on as I saw him jogging off into the distance. Little did I know that this would go so much farther. As the days went by, I began to see him more often on my route in the evenings. At first, I'd see him once every week or so, and we'd always stop and exchange friendly greetings. It was kind of nice, actually, making a sort of running buddy. I was also trying to be chatty and more social at the time as well. Because of this, after a while of encountering each other and nothing weird ever happening, I decided to try being a little more friendly and open. We exchanged names one evening, and I found out his name was Jacob. He explained to me he was new to the area and still figuring out a good route, which is why I'd been seeing him more and more often lately. With the ice now broken, every time I'd see him, we'd stop and have a more in-depth conversation about our daily lives. Eventually, after about 6 months of this going on, he started going on his jogs every single night, and he would jog alongside me for the first portion of our walk before our paths split. Honestly, we became kind of friends, and I did feel a little bit proud of myself. We'd chat and talk to each other, and it gave me more motivation to continue pushing myself. At some point, though, I got really sick, and I had to stop going out so much. When I started back up again after 2 months or so, the lack of motivation really got to me because I'd been forced to break a regular habit. I didn't really see him around anymore. I was a bit sad, but I figured he'd just decided on another route or something while I was gone. It wasn't like we'd ever gotten close enough to exchange numbers or anything anyway. I decided I'd be fine on my own. On my walk, there's this particular part of the path about 3/4 of the way through where you pass by a field with no streetlights into the beginnings of suburban-type neighborhoods with huge shrubs and trees on either side. Then it opens up into full standard block neighborhoods, and the streetlights all return. I never really had any creepy or weird feelings about this part of the path before, but about a week after me starting up my routine again, I would begin to get that feeling of being watched whenever I passed by this area. It was quite unnerving, but there was never anybody around, and nobody was out and about at this time of night anyway. I quickly decided I was just being paranoid. At one point, though, I decided to go at a different time than usual. I had just reached that area with the large shrubs and trees when I got that intense feeling of being watched once again, this time stronger than ever. I shivered a bit and stopped to look around. You can imagine my surprise when I was tapped on the shoulder once again. I turned only to see Jacob had materialized beside me just like the first time. Talk about freaky. How would he just come out of nowhere like that? Still though, at least I knew someone was here to keep me company now.
Hey there, I haven't seen you for a while. You been alright? I decided to stop by today and see if I could find you. I've missed you a lot, you know.
He smiled and gave a friendly laugh. I was a bit weirded out though. Looking specifically for me, surely he couldn't have missed me that much. I did my best not to show how weird I found that though, since I was already a bit weirded out. Instead though, I told him I was actually on my way back and cut my walk off early that day. I chalked it off to a one-time thing, although I did think I could see him give a quick look of anger and annoyance when I said I was heading back that day. I took a day-long break after going out again. Reaching the same area, I immediately felt that same feeling of being watched once again. Something was going on here, and I was not liking it at all. Surely at this point, feeling this so often could not just be paranoia. I stopped by some of the shrubbery and decided to take a look around and see if I could spot anything specifically. I took a step back for a moment and accidentally stumbled on the curb, catching myself by planting my feet in the soil by the brush. And in that exact moment, the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced in my life happened all at once. 1, I immediately felt my foot impact on something solid and slip slightly, causing me to fall. 2, I heard a male voice cry out in discomfort. And 3, I looked up from the ground, only to see someone standing there in the brush, hidden in the shadows amongst all the bushes. I could tell right away it was Jacob. I could hear a scared, guttural wheeze coming out of my mouth as I tried to find words to say in that moment. I was stuck like a deer in the headlights. I could see all over his face that he too was too startled to know what to do in that moment. I'd never been in a life or death situation before, so I never knew if I would be a fight person or a flight person. That night I discovered I was a flight person after all, and damn good at it too. Faster than I ever had in my life, I jumped up to my feet and started full-on sprinting away, losing my headphones in the process even. It was almost like an out-of-body experience. I could hear myself screaming, even though nobody was around to hear. Even more frightening though, after just a moment, I could hear heavy footsteps chasing behind me. As much weight as I had lost, I knew there was no way I was going to be able to outrun him. I took a chance. Turning to my right, I sprinted down a turn into a neighborhood I'd never gone down before. After I'd been running and making random turns down streets I didn't know for about 3 minutes or so, I finally slipped onto the porch of a random home and hid myself as best as I could in the shadows. I shit you not even 30 seconds later he came sprinting past, obviously searching for me. Needless to say, I sat down on that porch in the fetal position and called my dad to come pick me up. Then I started silently crying. Luckily, I made it home just fine that night. He didn't come back for me or anything, so I guess he must have gotten lost or given up too. After that, I decided to stop going on walks in that area and choose a different route altogether. Just recently though, I think I realized something. I had always felt like he looked somewhat familiar, but I had just put it down to his everyman sort of look. Thinking back on it now though, I think I actually did recognize him from somewhere. I just didn't realize it at the time. I'm fairly certain he's one of those few people I'd seen out and about taking out the trash or something in one of the neighborhoods I was walking through. I can't be perfectly sure, of course. It's not like I can go and ask him directly now, but I definitely have a pretty strong suspicion that he'd seen me out while walking and decided to start interacting with me after watching me for a while. Either way, I guess I really did get a good workout that night. This happened about 3 weeks ago. I'm generally a slightly paranoid person as it stands already, and I've listened to many of these types of stories. I'm a small woman in her early 20s who lives alone in a smallish condo/apartment with her cat. It's on the second floor of the building where I moved in a few months ago. There are 2 doors one must enter to get inside my apartment. First is outside leading into the building, and second is obviously my apartment door itself. Tenants have keys for the first outside door, which only has 1 lock, whereas the actual apartment doors have both locks and deadbolts. Otherwise, a visitor has to be buzzed in to be allowed inside. For some clarity, there are 8 apartments per building in my complex, with an outside door on either side of the building. Mine is closer to the back, and is situated directly above a currently empty space. My downstairs neighbor to the left is around my age, and the only neighbor I'm actually close with. She's often away though, staying with her boyfriend. This means that while I technically live near others, my home is very isolated. There is an outdoor light situated next to the door, but I'd noticed when returning home that the bulb had either broken or burned out, and hadn't thought to contact maintenance to fix it. It was already pretty late at night and I was tired anyway. There hadn't appeared to be many others home in my building, as the parking lot on my side wasn't particularly full. I was taking care of a few chores around the house at around 10 p.m. It was Friday night, so I was running the dishwasher and folding up laundry. I'd had a pretty long week at school, and arrived home probably an hour to an hour and a half before. My cat was kind of keeping me company as I puttered along. It was hard to hear much outside when the dishwasher was going, and I was already distracted, but I did notice a sort of soft rustling sound coming from outside. It didn't sound too strange aside from being fairly repetitive. I didn't really know what it was at this point, but being constantly anxious, I was too frightened of the dark to look outside the window to that side of the building. This might very well have been totally unrelated, but I still think it bears mentioning. Fast forward a bit. I was standing at my kitchen counter working on a report on my laptop. Over the sound of the dishwasher though, I heard a soft knock on my door. I was unsure at first if I'd even actually heard anything. I went still and waited for a moment. There it was again, quiet but a little longer and faster. This made me pretty uneasy. It was late at night. My first thought was that it might be one of my neighbors. I approached the door silently and looked out the peephole. As I mentioned, the only neighbor I know well is the young woman who lives downstairs, but I am familiar with what all the others look like. The man standing outside was completely unfamiliar to me. Tall, wearing either a dark blue or black jacket, Caucasian, and with very dark hair. I had no idea who this guy was. What was very unusual was just how close he was standing to the door, even distorted through the peephole. He was so close I would guess him to be standing right up against it, leaning his face in and staring through the peephole. There was an odd sort of energy in his stance, if that makes any sense. I felt extremely unnerved. I was glad I'd made very little noise when walking over. I backed up about 3 feet from the door and waited. I'm not totally sure how much time passed, but he stood there a couple of minutes, even longer than that, before I heard him go downstairs and through the outside door. Now, I've had a neighbor from downstairs knock on my door in the evening before to ask if I was experiencing a power outage like him. He'd brought his wife with him, probably to reassure me, and had stood a reasonable distance from the door after knocking firmly. That's exactly what this strange guy didn't do. I know I'm paranoid though, so I try to convince myself I was making a big deal of nothing. I told myself this was probably just a similar situation. I was far too immediately uncomfortable though to consider answering the door. I decided to listen to my gut instead. I texted both my mom and my male friend about the situation. My friend offered to come keep me company, but by that time I had talked myself out of my nervousness and assured him I was fine. I went to sleep about an hour later and woke up having almost completely forgotten about it. Shit got weird the next day though. Only in the context of what I saw next morning did that knock begin to seem frightening. I had agreed to accompany my mom and her boyfriend to a yard sale that morning in some nearby neighborhoods. They were picking me up early, around 7:30. My mom gave me a call from her car when they arrived on my side of the building to let me know to come down. I grabbed my bag, went out my door and downstairs, but as soon as I opened the outside door, something was very clearly wrong. The handle turned very loosely in my hand, and the door popped open very easily. Upon shutting it again behind me, the handle itself completely fell out of the hole. Looking back, I wish I'd taken a picture of it because it's a little bit hard to describe. It had obviously been tampered with. The outside portion of the door handle held in place with screws was now completely missing. The lock component of the handle was missing too. Essentially, all that was left behind was a stripped handle with a hole in the middle where the keyhole should be. My mom, having heard about the knocking incident from me the night before, was not cool with this all and insisted I report this. I contacted maintenance and the police, but there are no cameras situated near my apartment and definitely not near my door. I've gotten no additional information as of now. In talking with my neighbors, who were obviously made aware of the vandalism as well, nobody who was at home or awake around that time heard anyone knock on their door, or came in contact with, or saw the man I described. Maybe I'm overthinking a bit, but this does make me nervous. It makes the approach seem much more targeted and less random, as if the person knew I'd be there alone. For what it's worth, at least the outside door handle was replaced very quickly that afternoon, and nothing like that has happened ever since. This happened 17 years ago, so please forgive me if the exact details are a little bit fuzzy. It was the summer of 1999, and I was spending the vacation with my mother in New Mexico. I was a 12-year-old girl going on 21 that had a very severe attitude. I made friends easily with a few girls that lived just around the corner from my mom's house. We spent almost every moment of the summer together as a group of 4, all of us thinking we were older and smarter than everyone else. Nikki, Katie, Julie, and myself were the last generation of home phone lines, playing outside on the trampoline until dark and having sleepovers. A time when we all watched VHS tapes, listened to cassette tapes on our Walkman, and it was okay to let your children wander around town at night. We rarely locked the front door either. We had no cell phones or internet. My backyard had a concrete wall around it and a gate. Behind the wall was desert as far as the eye could see. Just a barren wasteland of dirt, cacti, shrubs, and mountains going all the way off into the distance. The town had a major railroad track running straight through it, and there was a major street that had gas stations galore, restaurants, hotels, all those sorts of attractions. We all received the same warnings from our parents. Stay out of the desert and stay away from the tracks. Don't walk the main strip at night. You think we listened? Absolutely not. Julie, Nikki, and I spent our days walking through the desert, crossing the tracks as much as possible, and going down the strip to Katie's house. Sometimes we would just walk around till dusk. Some days we would go to my house to jump on the trampoline. This particular day, we got to Katie's house prepared to stay for the weekend because her parents were out of town. We were going to have a party. The first night, the girls were all jumping from a spiral staircase onto a giant beanbag. I refused to participate due to my fear of extreme heights. We then got down to sleepover business, so to say, and decided to watch the original Exorcist. Fucking scary shit, man. I didn't sleep at all. The second night, we all told our parents Katie's mom was going to drive us to the movies. Obviously, we did not tell them we were actually there alone. We all got money for the movies and then promptly walked down the strip to get junk food at the little store. I wish I could say we were aware of our surroundings, but we really weren't. We were absolutely oblivious of the man who had followed us all the way back to the house. I feel I should mention that Katie's parents were loaded. They had a huge property with numerous buildings and broken down cars her dad was remodeling. Their house also had a large open kitchen, a dining room, and a living room. There were no walls, and the whole room was lined with windows. There were 2 doors, front and back. The day so far was going just as planned. We got our junk food and made it home safely. We made pizza in the oven, and for some reason, one of the girls turned on the TV to the news. As we were eating, we heard a story about staying indoors because of a report of a suspicious man walking the strip. Suspicious man, right. We laughed and joked about this suspicious man. Fast forward a few hours though. I don't remember exactly what happened, but as girls tend to do, we said something that hurt Julie's feelings, and she stormed out of the house in anger. I went after her and opened the front door, just in time to see her light up a cigarette. We were kinda bad kids. I sat down with her on a bench while I listened to her bitch about the other 2. Suddenly though, the air got thick with anxiety, and Julie felt it too. I quietly asked her if she felt like she was being watched. She responded with a tiny nod, and then we were blinded. Someone was in a car in the driveway and had just shined their brights onto us. My heart was racing as I stood up and pulled Julie out of the spot she seemed to be stuck in. As we turned to run inside, the man in the car made a sound. I can't describe this sound to anything other than a high-pitched squeal that turned into an animal's growl. I was scared beyond all reason. Somehow, I managed to get both of us inside the house. As soon as we got inside, the headlights shut off, and it was pitch black once again. I locked the door and turned off the light. By this time, Julie had regained her composure enough to tell the other 2 what had happened, as I frantically checked the back door and turned every light off. I told them to shut the fuck up and listen by the back door. I heard the car door close and was praying to every god he would just go away. Just then, right by my cheek, the door handle started to wiggle slowly, then frantically. I crawled away from the door and moved to where my friends were. For the next 2 or 3 hours, we sat there still as stone and listened to this man bang on every window and door, trying to find a way inside. The phone was located across the room right next to 2 windows. Eventually, I got up the courage to run to the phone and called my mom. I told her we were there all alone and someone was trying to break inside. I hung up with her and waited. Julie screamed out to the man that we had called the cops, and all of a sudden the banging just stopped. We sat there and waited, listening to him get in his car, and then that sound again, that squeal that turned into a growl, and as soon as he came, he was gone. My mom and stepdad showed up and checked the whole place out. They found tire tracks and cigarette butts in the driveway where his car had been, proving he'd been watching us for quite a while. The truly scary part, though, is there were scratch marks all over the doors and windows. Needless to say, Katie spent the rest of the weekend at Nikki's house and had a great story for her parents when they got home. Our parents didn't punish us for lying and being reckless. I guess 2 hours of torture at the hands of a madman was enough. We did make a report to the police, but the man was never caught in the end. I worked as a flight attendant for a few years when I decided to take an extended sabbatical from college. There were a handful of situations I encountered, but one in particular makes my skin crawl more than any other. I was born and raised in Texas, but had moved to New York when I was 21. So, when I found out at the beginning of a week-long trip that I'd have a couple of overnights in Austin, I was super excited to go to my home state for a few weeks. My brother lived just north of the city, and we planned to hang out and go to dinner the night I arrived when he got off work. The following day, we were going to meet up with our dad who lived about an hour away. So I get to the hotel downtown. The crew and I all check in and we each head off to our own rooms. After a short elevator ride, I arrive at mine, when not even 5 minutes later, there's a loud, hard knock on the door. It was around 1 or 2 p.m. I hadn't called either my dad or my brother to let them know I was in town yet, so they wouldn't know what room it was. I assumed it was maybe one of my crewmates, so I headed over to the door. Before even making it there, however, a loud male voice on the other side boomed.
The front desk sent me about the bathroom problem you called in.
Before trying to open the door.
Unlock the door and open up, miss. I need in now.
I froze in my tracks. I hadn't even been in the bathroom yet, let alone called in anything to the front desk. I'm a fairly petite chick, and while I take no shit from anyone despite my size, it's of course wise to err on the side of caution. Slowly inching toward the door to look out the peephole, all I could tell was the man on the other side must be giant and easily over double my weight. No way in hell was I going to unlock that door. I responded to the man, telling him he must have the wrong room. He continued to pound on the door though, while constantly turning the handle. He told me no, he needed in right now, and he was getting in one way or another. I was panicking, but thankfully I still had enough sense to grab the phone and call the front desk. The concierge confirmed that they had neither sent anyone up to my room, nor had they received a call about the bathroom. The entire time, this guy was so determined to get into my room, pounding at the door and yelling. Luckily, the front desk had dispatched security already to my floor. When the officers stepped off the elevator a few moments later, I could hear them in the hallway approaching and asking the man who he was, what he was doing, and telling him he needed to leave right now. He immediately got hostile and aggressive toward them. The front desk clerk I was still on the phone with told me the police had been called and were now on their way. All the while, I'm trapped here in my room, scared shitless. Long story short, the cops showed up pretty quickly and managed to arrest the guy for trespassing. A criminal menacing as well, or some shit I believe. I later found out the guy was wanted in connection to a string of break-ins and violent sexual assaults in Austin. He had seen and stalked me from the minute I entered the hotel lobby. Apparently, I was exactly his type of victim. Nothing else happened after that, but it still rattled the fuck out of me for the rest of my stay in that hotel.